Brooklyn, 1919. Frankie Yale's back room reeks of cigar smoke and whiskey. 15 gang leaders sit around a poker table. Men who control Brooklyn's rackets, twice Al Capone's age, watching the 20-year-old with the scarred face ask for his own territory. Coney Island, his own operation. They laugh. One throws a lit cigar at him. "Get out, kid." Capone doesn't flinch. He pulls a gold pocket watch from his vest, slams it on the table. The watch spins, catching lamplight. Engraved letters visible. A C. "5 years," Capone says. "That's all I need." More laughter. The watch belonged to his father, immigrant barber who died broke, left Capone nothing but debt and ambition. Frankie Yale waves him off. "Come back when you're somebody." Capone pockets the watch, walks out. 5 years later, 1924, 12 of those 15 men either work for Capone or they're dead. The watch would be the last thing 3 of them ever saw. The scene at Frankie Yale's gambling den in the fall of 1919 became Brooklyn legend, but not for the reasons you'd think. Al Capone had just turned 20, fresh scar down his left cheek from a bar fight, working as Yale's driver and occasional enforcer. Nothing special. Just another Italian kid trying to survive Prohibition's early days. Then he walked into that back room where the real powers sat. 15 men controlled Brooklyn. Joe Masseria's crew, independent operators, fixers who ran protection rackets from Red Hook to Flatbush. They were untouchable. When Capone asked for Coney Island territory, they didn't just refuse him. They humiliated him, called him the errand boy, laughed at his scar. But when Capone slammed that gold watch on the felt poker table and said 5 years, something shifted. Not in the room, in Capone. One gang leader, Salvatore Maranzano, didn't laugh. He watched Capone's face, saw something the others missed: control, patience, certainty. Capone picked up the watch, walked out without another word. He'd memorized 15 faces, 15 names. The clock had started. The gold watch carried weight beyond its metal. Capone's father, Antonio, died in 1918 from tuberculosis. Immigrant barber from Naples who spent 30 years cutting hair in Brooklyn, dreaming of owning his own shop, never made it. Left his son $200 in debt and that pocket watch engraved with his initials, a C. Young Al kept the watch, studied his father's mistakes. Antonio worked hard but died poor because he had no system, no leverage, no understanding of time as a weapon. The father's final words, according to people close to Capone, were, "Time is the only thing rich men can't buy more of. Use yours better than I used mine." By late 1919, Capone was working full-time for Frankie Yale, running numbers, collecting debts, learning how territories worked. He started keeping a notebook. 15 names went in there after that backroom meeting. Next to each name, routines, habits, weaknesses, who they answered to, where they drank, who they trusted. The watch became his timer. 5 years to transform from nobody to somebody. He set the deadline himself. Nobody forced it. That made it binding. December 1919. A telegram arrived from Chicago. Johnny Torrio, one of the smartest operators in the country, needed muscle for his expanding bootlegging operation. Prohibition was coming January 1920, and Torrio saw it. Billion-dollar industry about to explode. He remembered Capone from New York, wanted him in Chicago. Capone showed the telegram to Frankie Yale. Yale read it, laughed. "Go. Chicago needs young guys who think they're tough." Before leaving, Capone made courtesy calls, visited each of the 15 gang leaders who'd laughed at him, showed them the watch again. "Remember this," he'd say. 5 years. They still laughed. What's a 20-year-old going to do from Chicago? Capone boarded a train in January 1920 with $300, the watch, the notebook, and absolute focus. As Brooklyn disappeared through the window, he wound the watch. Tick, tick, tick. The 5-year countdown had begun. The gang leaders forgot about him within a week. That was their first mistake. Capone never forgot anything. Capone arrived in Chicago in January 1920 as Prohibition became federal law. Perfect timing. Johnny Torrio ran a sophisticated operation. Gambling dens, brothels, and now bootlegging. He wasn't like the Brooklyn thugs. Torrio thought like a businessman. Logistics, supply chains, political payoffs, systematic expansion. Capone absorbed everything. Within months, he was managing Torrio's brothels. Within a year, overseeing distribution routes. The Torrio Capone organization started pulling in serious money. By 1923, the operation grossed over $100 million annually. Meanwhile, back in Brooklyn, those 15 gang leaders were also prospering from Prohibition. Money flooded the streets, they expanded territories, bought politicians, lived like kings. But they weren't watching Chicago. They didn't see Capone learning, building, preparing. He sent letters back to Brooklyn, friendly notes, checking in, asking about old neighborhoods, keeping contact. The watch sat on his desk in his small Chicago office. He checked it constantly, calculated time remaining. 4 years left. 3 years. The notebook stayed current. He added details about each of the 15 names. Who'd been arrested, who married whom, which operations were struggling. Information accumulated like ammunition. And Capone waited. In 1921, 2 of the 15 names got arrested in a major Brooklyn bootlegging raid. FBI records later showed the anonymous tip came from Chicago, a payphone near Torrio's headquarters. Capone opened his notebook, drew neat lines through both names, wrote beside them, "Removed, not by my hand." He learned something crucial. Sometimes you don't need to pull the trigger. You just need to create opportunity. Let the system do the work. That same year, a third name, Frankie Marlowe, mid-level operator who controlled the Fulton Street docks, received a letter from Chicago. Capone's proposition was simple. Partnership. Marlowe needed Chicago whiskey connections. Capone needed Brooklyn distribution. The deal made sense. Marlowe accepted. He became Capone's first Brooklyn lieutenant. No longer laughing, now working for the kid with the scar. When they met to finalize terms, Capone placed the gold watch on the table between them. 4 years left, Capone said. You made the right choice. Marlowe stared at the watch, remembered the backroom meeting 2 years earlier. He'd been one of the ones laughing. Now he was taking orders. The watch had become Capone's signature. He showed it during every negotiation, every deal. A reminder that time was running out. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Capone wasn't hunting the 15 gang leaders. He was building an empire so powerful they'd have to choose, join him or fight him. And fighting meant competing against Chicago's resources, Torrio's strategy, and Capone's ruthlessness. Most couldn't win that war. The smart ones knew it. Early 1922 brought a turning point. Johnny Torrio got ambushed outside his home, shot multiple times by rival gang members. He survived but decided Chicago was too dangerous. By spring, he'd retired to Italy with his fortune intact. At 23 years old, Al Capone inherited the entire operation. Brothels, gambling dens, breweries, distribution networks, political connections. Annual revenue, $60 million and climbing. Back in Brooklyn, the gang leaders heard rumors. The kid now ran Chicago. Some dismissed it, others paid attention. Capone sent messengers to Brooklyn with offers for 5 more names from his list. Work with me or compete against me. 3 accepted the deal. They became Brooklyn lieutenants, operating Capone territories under Chicago's umbrella. 2 refused. Both proud, both sure Brooklyn would always belong to Brooklyn. Both died within 6 months. One in a hijacking shootout, another in a restaurant bombing. Police called them gang hits, unrelated to Chicago. But people who knew the stories noticed something. Capone's watch had been seen at meetings just weeks before both deaths. The gold watch now sat openly displayed in Capone's Lexington hotel office. On his desk, visible to everyone who entered. Tick, tick, tick. Constant reminder. By the end of 1922, 8 of the original 15 names were accounted for. 2 in prison, 1 fled to Canada, 3 working for Capone, 2 dead. 7 remained independent. The 5-year deadline stood at 3 years remaining. Capone's empire now reached from Chicago to Detroit to Cleveland. Brooklyn was next. People close to Capone said he kept the notebook in his desk drawer, checking it nightly, crossing off names, updating information. The hunt had become systematic, methodical, inevitable. In 1923, Capone made his first return trip to Brooklyn, arranged a meeting in the same back room where he'd been laughed at 4 years earlier. Only 6 of the original 15 gang leaders still operated independently. The others were dead, imprisoned, working for Capone, or had fled. The 6 who showed up found a different Al Capone. 24 now, wearing a $3,000 suit, flanked by bodyguards controlling an empire that dwarfed anything Brooklyn had ever seen. Capone placed the gold watch on the same poker table. Let it sit there, ticking. 2 years left, he said. His offer was straightforward. Merge operations, answer to Chicago, keep your territories but pay tribute, or compete. The room was silent. No laughter this time. Salvatore Maranzano, the one who hadn't laughed in 1919, leaned forward. What makes you think you'll survive 2 more years? Every gang in America wants you dead. Capone's answer became legendary. I already survived the 5 I promised. That's harder than you think. 4 of the 6 took the deal that night. 2 refused. Maranzano was one of them. He wasn't stupid. He understood what Capone was building. He just thought he could build something bigger. Within months, Maranzano started organizing opposition, reaching out to Capone's enemies, planning assassinations. The Castellamarese War was brewing, and Maranzano positioned himself as Capone's chief rival. But here's what Maranzano missed. Capone had spent 5 years preparing for this exact moment. Every ally cultivated, every territory secured, every political connection bought, it all led here. The watch kept ticking. 2 years to the deadline. 12 names accounted for. 3 left, and one of them had just declared war. By 1924, the 5-year deadline arrived. Al Capone's empire was worth $100 million annually. He controlled Chicago, influenced Cleveland and Detroit, and now had tentacles throughout Brooklyn. 4 independent operators from the original 15 had chosen sides in the Maranzano conflict. 2 joined Maranzano, betting against Capone. 2 stayed neutral, tried to play both sides. Capone couldn't allow neutrality. Both neutral operators died in accidents that year. One in a car crash that looked suspicious, another in a warehouse fire that started at 3 a.m. Convenient timing. By the time the 5-year mark hit, the scoreboard was clear. 7 of the original 15 were dead, 5 were working for Capone, 3 were fighting him. The gold watch sat on Capone's desk in Chicago, and according to people who visited him, he'd stare at it for long stretches, silent. The deadline had arrived. He'd done exactly what he promised. They laughed at 5 years, he told one associate. I gave them 5 years. Now they're history. But the discovery went deeper than revenge. Capone had proven something to himself, that timelines work, that systematic planning beats raw ambition, that being underestimated is an advantage if you use it right. His father had failed because he had no system. Capone built nothing but systems. The watch wasn't just a symbol, it was proof that time, used correctly, becomes power. The gang leaders in 1919 thought 5 years was a joke. Capone showed them it was a weapon. You think you know where this is going? You don't. Because while Capone won the 5-year bet, the real question was, what happens after the deadline passes? November 1924. Capone hosted a meeting in his Lexington hotel suite. The remaining gang leaders who worked for him attended, 12 men total from the original 15, minus the 7 dead. 3 names remained unaccounted for. Salvatore Maranzano and 2 of his lieutenants who joined his war against Capone. During that meeting, Capone did something unexpected. He opened the gold watch. Inside, pressed behind the mechanism, was a tiny photograph, his father Antonio, standing outside his Brooklyn barbershop in 1905. Capone showed it to the men. My father gave himself 5 years to build his own business. He failed, died cutting other men's hair. The room went quiet. Capone continued. On his deathbed, he said, prove you're not just a barber's son. 5 years was his timeline. I took the same timeline, except I didn't fail. The watch snapped shut. The men understood. This was never about them. It was about Capone proving something to a dead man. That's when the legend stopped being about revenge and became about legacy. But 3 names still remained. Maranzano continued operating out of New York, organizing opposition, hiring assassins. Between 1925 and 1926, Capone survived 4 assassination attempts. Bombs, drive-by shootings, poisoning attempts, all connected to Maranzano's network. One of the remaining gang leaders fled to Italy in 1926, hoping distance would save him. Capone's connections found him in Naples, dead by 1927. Another made peace, realized fighting was suicide, became one of Capone's most loyal lieutenants. That left one, Salvatore Maranzano, the smartest of the 15, the only one who saw Capone coming back in 1919, and the most dangerous enemy Capone ever faced. The watch kept ticking, but now it measured something different. How long until the final name got crossed off? The war between Capone and Maranzano stretched from 1925 to 1931. Maranzano was brilliant, organized crime families across New York, built alliances Capone couldn't penetrate, survived multiple hits. The FBI later estimated Maranzano controlled operations worth $40 million annually. But he made one critical mistake. He fixated on destroying Capone personally. Every resource, every strategy, every alliance was aimed at killing Scarface. Meanwhile, Capone diversified, built legitimate businesses, bought judges, expanded into new territories. The watch stayed visible on his desk. Psychological warfare. Every time Maranzano's representatives met with Capone, they saw it. Tick, tick, tick. Time running out. In September 1931, Salvatore Maranzano was killed in his Manhattan office. But here's the twist. Capone didn't order the hit. Lucky Luciano's crew did it, part of a larger reorganization of New York crime families. Maranzano died never knowing that Capone had already won. All 15 original gang leaders were now accounted for. 7 dead, 5 working for Capone, 2 fled, 1 murdered by rivals. The 5-year prediction had stretched into a 12-year dynasty, but the watch was still ticking. Because while Capone conquered the underworld, the federal government was closing in. Tax evasion charges, the one enemy his watch couldn't time. Between 1925 and 1931, Capone survived assassinations, wars with rival gangs, and federal investigations. The watch witnessed it all, but he missed something crucial. Al Capone, legendary gangster who conquered 15 hardened criminals through patience and timing, couldn't outrun the IRS. In October 1931, he was convicted of tax evasion, sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. His empire, built systematically over 12 years, began crumbling immediately. Without Capone's control, lieutenants fought for territory. The organization fragmented. That gold watch? Confiscated as evidence. FBI inventory number A-47291. Listed alongside his cash, cars, and property. The government took everything. Capone entered Atlanta Penitentiary in 1932, transferred to Alcatraz in 1934. Prison destroyed him. Syphilis, contracted years earlier and left untreated, ravaged his brain. By 1938, his mental capacity had deteriorated to that of a 12-year-old child. Released in 1939, he was no longer Scarface, just a sick man who'd forgotten most of his empire. The 15 gang leaders? All gone. Dead, imprisoned, fled, or irrelevant. But Capone had become irrelevant too. Time, his greatest weapon, had turned against him. Disease and imprisonment stole the years the watch had measured so carefully. The final irony, Capone conquered time in the underworld, but couldn't escape it in the end. Al Capone died in Miami on January 25, 1947. He was 48. Stroke and pneumonia took him. A man who'd survived wars, assassinations, and federal prison died from common illness. His empire was long gone. The 15 gang leaders he'd hunted were forgotten. Brooklyn's rackets belonged to new operators who'd never heard of that 1919 backroom meeting. But the watch survived. In the 1960s, the FBI auctioned off confiscated property from Prohibition-era cases. The gold pocket watch appeared in the catalog, sold for $18,000 to a private collector. Today, it's estimated to be worth over $500,000. The engraving is still visible. A.C. Antonio Capone. The watch face shows 5 o'clock, frozen there like a memorial. Some collectors say Capone stopped the hands at 5 o'clock deliberately before his arrest, a final nod to the 5-year deadline that built his empire. Others claim it just broke. Nobody knows for certain. The watch sits in a private collection now, occasionally displayed in crime museums. Tourists stare at it, take photos. Most don't know the story behind it, don't know about the 15 gang leaders or the 5-year promise. Just see a fancy antique. But the legend lives in that stop time. 5 years to build an empire, 50 years to become eternal. Time doesn't care who you are. Doesn't care how many territories you control, how much money you made, how many enemies you buried. It just keeps ticking until your number's up. Al Capone understood this better than anyone. Used time as a weapon when the 15 gang leaders laughed at him. Turned 5 years into a systematic hunt that left most of them dead or working for him. But time eventually won. Syphilis, imprisonment, government prosecution, all the things the watch couldn't time, couldn't plan for. The man who conquered Brooklyn from Chicago couldn't conquer the IRS, couldn't outrun disease. The gold watch with AC engraved on it measured his rise but not his fall. That's the hard truth about legends. The building takes years, the breaking takes moments. Capone proved you can own a city, but you can't own the clock.